Good morning. Welcome to QX Church. I'm Pastor Scott Conway, and today's message is actually a request. I'm working on a series, and not much of this series is done, and so before I begin the next series, I want to have more of it completed, and so I was looking for something else I was going to do today. And we have people who come here in person, and we record this live, of course, but we have a significant number of people that follow on video and follow on audio, and I was having a conversation yesterday with one of them that's going through some stuff, and she said that the story of what I was sharing with her, she found particularly helpful, particularly inspiring, and especially useful for some of the important things she had to do and the important discussions she had to have. And so she actually suggested that I use what we were talking about yesterday as the message today. And I thought, well, that sounds like a pretty decent idea, and I'm going to go ahead and go with that. So today is titled Running on Empty, The Pile-On, and Radical Responsibility. Every once in a while I do what I call a sharing day, where it's more talking, less jest lesson. But what I do is I kind of share the lessons of what I'm working on, the lessons of the things that I'm dealing with, the principles that I'm using as I work my way through stuff. And by working with that and those tools, kind of sharing the reality of my day-to-day and how it is I get through some of it, just on the principle level. Now, one of the things that you'll take note of is that I don't always get through these things on a theology level. That there is a lot of my faith involved, but I don't generally hang my hat on what you might classically consider theological premises. That they're more philosophical premises. Now, they may be backed up by verses in the Bible. I may personally hang my hat on the verses in the Bible, but it's the principle that drives it. Because I also see a lot of times that people hang their hat on verses in the Bible because it feels good, but they're misapplying things. That they're taking a promise made to Israel as though it's a promise made to them. They'll take something said about the prophet Jeremiah as though it's being said about them. They'll take something that was being said to or by King David as though, well, that's for me. That's God's promise for me. And frankly, sometimes I have a problem with that. Because it means what it means in the context it means. That we may find some comfort in it. We may find some application in it. But that's very different than God's made a promise. And so in some of the situations like what we're going through now, you get the idea, well, God promises that He won't put anything on you more than you can bear. Well, I don't actually necessarily believe that's true. It sounds good, it's comforting, it helps carry us through things, but to be perfectly frank, you can look around the world and look around history, and there's been stuff that's been dumped on people that was too much for them, that frankly ended them, that there's nothing they could do about. And so you look at some things and you start to really break out that kind of theology, and I've done this with people in debate where they said, well, God doesn't give you anything more than you can bear. And so I say, okay, so if somebody dies from something, what does that mean? Well, it means that they didn't need to survive. Like, okay, so what does it mean then if God's not going to give me more than I can bear? Does that mean that I'm going to live or I'm going to die? You just told me, well, that doesn't. Well, all you really need is salvation. Say, okay, so that means that if someone dies without salvation, what does that mean? That they didn't need salvation? So, well, God had to present the gospel to them. It's like, so there's nobody on the planet who's ever died without the gospel being presented to them. And you see, when you really begin to walk it out, it may be comforting to hear that. It may be comforting to say that, but is it actually true? And when you look at it as though it's God's promise to you and you're going to cling to that and hang on to that, it can be empowering, it can be comforting, it can carry you through stuff. But when you ascribe it to God as though it is a promise from God, I believe you're being incorrect. So when I talk about these things, I talk about them in terms of principles. I talk them in terms of ideas. I talk about them in terms of philosophical concepts that anybody can apply no matter what your belief system, anyone can apply no matter what your religion, anyone can apply even if you reject religion, because it's the principle at work. So when I'm talking about running on empty, when I'm talking about the pylon, when I'm talking about radical responsibility, I'm talking about it from a philosophical point of view. Now, here gets to be one of the things sometimes people notice about me is how little I ascribe a lot of theological perspectives to God, because then what that's doing is I am declaring the principle that I'm stating as divine authority, as co-equal to Scripture. And what if I'm wrong? I just blame God for a theological principle. I just declared that God says, for instance, nothing that happens to you is more than you can bear. That no human being in the history of the planet Earth has ever had more stuff happen to them that was more than they could bear. And that means if something broke them, that God has declared them to be broken. And kind of one of the problems with Calvinistic thinking is when you say there is no free will, God is in control of everything, then you're saying, okay, so all this horrific things that just happened, God did that. And so, well, yeah, because God is in control. It's like, okay, so then you're going to sit down and you're going to tell this 4-year-old who has been horribly abused that God is abusing her. Well, no, the other person's abusing her. But who's in control of the abuser? And so on and so on and so on. So I try to be very careful about ascribing things to God. Because if I ascribe it to God and someone believes me, I am defining God for that person. So I try to be very, very careful about that. I let people discover God more or less on their own. Certainly much more on their own than I typically will see in church, and I will typically hear from pastors. But that's my point of view. That's the way I come at things. So when we talk about a QX way, we talk about the way we teach here. We talk about my way. We talk about the way I do things. This is how I do it. Doesn't mean everyone else has to do it. Doesn't mean anyone else has to do it. This is just how I do it. So I take responsibility for my own teaching. If you disagree with me, you're disagreeing with Scott. You're not disagreeing with God. Some people will say, well, I'm not the one saying it, God's saying it. Like, okay, so you're basically saying either what you're saying is God, you're not saying what you're saying is you, so that means if I don't like what you're saying, therefore I don't like God, and if I don't like God, then obviously I shouldn't like the religion that God is espousing, and so on and so on. And so there's a whole chain there that is the reason I don't do that. That's even why I like things like, when you go to something and it's in a tradition of St. Ignatius, or it's in a tradition of Martin Luther, or it's in a tradition of Calvin, or it's a tradition of the Arminian tradition. The reason I like those kind of labels is that it tells you, okay, this is coming through this person. This is coming through this tradition. And that it's ascribing the authority to the tradition instead of to God. Now, do they believe they're following God? Of course they do. That's how they arrive at their conclusions. They're seeking God, and the conclusion that they draw might be a little bit at variance from the conclusion somebody else draws. We do exactly the same thing. And so long as we take responsibility for that and we don't ascribe it to God, we ascribe it to ourselves and our own interpretation, I think that's okay. Other people think that, well, you're stepping in the place of God. Well, I think we're doing exactly the opposite. I think the people who say it's God are the ones stepping in the place of God. So that's kind of how we approach things. And that's kind of a little bit of my philosophy. So when I'm sharing today, you'll notice that I talk very, very little about it from a theological standpoint. And that is by design, and that is on purpose. $2 on pump 1, please. Money was tight. I still had to get where I had to get. And that little light that warns you that you're going to be out of gas, that light was on. All I had was $2, so that's all I could put in. It was enough for the light to go off, even though I barely noticed the needle move. $2 one day, $3 on another, $5 on a good day. And I just sort of kept running somewhere between empty and a quarter tank. until I could finally afford to fill up. But you know what? I might have driven a whole lot of miles with that little light on. But I got everywhere I had to be. Everywhere I had to be. I just skipped a lot of things that I wanted to go to because I just couldn't get there. I didn't have the gas. I didn't have a ride. But I got through that season of life running on empty. Sometimes that's what life is like. That's part of what my life has been like lately, is this running on empty metaphor. That I made some decisions. And the decisions I made helped run me down to empty. I've also made some other decisions to be doing things to fill me back up. But I haven't gotten anywhere near full. I feel like what keeps happening is I get up to 5%, 10%, 20%, and something else is happening. The pile-on just won't stop. The language sometimes we'll use is like, oh yeah, it just keeps getting worse. Well, it's not so much that anything is getting worse, it's just that there's this pile-on that keeps happening. No one thing is worse than it was before, but there's just another thing, and another thing, and another thing. There's been some huge things, a death, and all the things related to the death, the counseling, the funeral, going through the emotional rawness with the family, doing the funeral, doing the counseling that was connected to that, dealing with the people who have intense guilt connected to that. Plans that blew apart because of that. And the hardest part is being a comfort to people who in part are blaming you because you didn't do what they wish you had done. Stuff like that is hard. What I call sometimes the suckiest part of being a pastor. A crash, being out of town when it happened, so I have to just let whatever happens happen. Let it be handled by other people. It is what it is. Finding out that the driver was cited for having no insurance. I mean, these are some pretty big and significant things. These are the kind of things that can not just interrupt someone's life on a momentary basis. These are the kind of things that can shut down somebody's life. There's been a stream of small things too. A car that died needed $1,500 of repairs. I had been saving up money to get some work done on my vehicle that needed to be done, and then as I was finally saving up the money, I thought, okay, I'll be able to get to that later on this week or maybe next week, and then the water pump blows. And what was going to be a $600 job quickly turns into a $1,200 job, and then a $1,500 job. And there's still more work to be done. There's at least another $200 or $300 of work to be done that I know about, and some indication that if what we know about gets handled and doesn't solve the problem, it could be many more hundreds of dollars after that. A phone had died because I needed a new battery. And every time it got down between 30 and 50%, it would just wink out. It might be sitting in 85, 90, 95%. And then all of it just starts working its way down pretty fast. And then somewhere between 30 and 50, it just winks down to between 1 and 10%. And then it shuts down. Need a new battery. Procedural problems on a case that I'm filing, causing a 2-week delay in getting things fixed because we need the lawsuit in order to have a document to serve. We need to serve it to get the other side to go find their insurance company so then we can start getting the work started. And there's been literally weeks of delay in handling some new procedures and some new processes that I'm going through for the very first time on that. Now I have a computer that's failing. And in fact, all of my notes for today disappeared. That what I had found out, not until after I opened up my computer this morning, was that none of the files I'm trying to save while I'm working on it were actually saving. And so I'm doing all of this work, I'm saving my files, but then there's no files. Something's going on with the computer where it wasn't saving the document. My saving grace was I had sent someone else a PDF of today's notes. And I was able to go to that message and extract my own PDF file that I sent, and then cut and paste the PDF file into a doc file so I could organize it for my speaking notes for this morning. So my computer's dying. And this has been more and more of a problem. I thought it was an interaction problem between the computers, but no, this is getting to be a problem. And if I accidentally bump the computer in a certain way, the hard drive winks out, the desktop goes black, and then I have to shut things down and reboot things to do anything, and whatever I was working on that didn't get saved, even if I thought I was saving it, is gone. So it's just a pile on it. But it's no big deal. No one part of it really is that big of a problem. But it's just one thing after another, after another, after another. And on top of that, there's just the ordinary string of things that in the ordinary day-to-day living, you go, okay, it's regular stuff. It's just inconvenient. It's just a little bit annoying. It's just a little bit frustrating, a little bit painful. But when it's just on top of everything else, it is knocking down that last little bit of running on empty. The sort of things where, no big deal. If you have a full tank, you hardly notice. But when that little light is already on warning you that you are almost empty, anything happening that makes you have to gun it to get out of a situation puts you at risk of completely running out. Anything happening that requires a run up a hill all of a sudden becomes a big deal because you could run stuff out. Anything that creates a problem where you have to go down a hill, it might be really easy to get in, but will I be able to get out? Because then I have to come back up the hill to get out of that. And this sort of thing when you're running on empty, this sort of thing when you're already hurt, and the little things happen, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But because you're already hurt, it's a big deal. Those sort of little annoying things keep happening. We call there's almost this magical magnetic effect we call attract impact 18-inch radius. So if anyone's ever had like that pain somewhere, like you have a jammed finger, and that you'd swear that in the last 2 years, almost nothing ever hits that finger, but because it's hurt right now, it seems like if anything's going to hit within 18 inches of where that finger is hurt, somehow it just gets sucked right into that finger. And that it happens. It's weird, but it happens. So it just keeps piling on. Nothing's getting worse. It's just that things won't stop. It's not even that things aren't getting better as they go, because most of them are. The car's better now than before the repairs. Before the repairs, obviously when I took it in, water is kind of gushing out from inside the engine because the water pump blew. The car was overheating. Why? Because the water was leaking from the water pump before the water pump blew. The rattle in the wheel well is better because the wheel bearing has been replaced. The car drives straighter more consistently because it's been aligned. And so, it's better. It costs a lot of money to get better, but it's better. The phone's better now. It has a brand new battery. Stays over 90% a lot longer than it used to. When it drops down to 50%, it stays at 50%. When it drops down to 30%, it stays at 30%. And so now I've got a long-lasting battery. The phone is a lot better now. The computer will be better once I replace it. Once there's a newer computer, I found the computer that I want, and I need to check out some things a little bit more, but hopefully a week from today I'll be teaching and preaching and writing and working on a new computer. The dojo will be better once it's finally fixed. It's just that the road is so bumpy that you might know everything's going to be fine, but just getting from here to there sometimes is like, really, does it have to be this exhausting? And that answer is sometimes, well, yeah, pretty much. I mean, anyone who's had to make a 6-hour drive somewhere, or an 8-hour, or a 12-hour drive, sometimes that drive isn't fun, but it's the road there. Sometimes you have somebody that ordinarily might be a 5 or 6-hour drive. This happened to me when I was going to Las Vegas last year. Normally it's about a 5-6 hour drive, including my stops. And for whatever reason, some accidents up ahead and construction going on, it took me 10 hours to get there. That happens sometimes, where just the road is hard. And you don't know why, it just is. And this whole pile-on thing going on is not just me, it seems to be a lot of people. Just yesterday I was talking with a young man whose employer hasn't paid him for 3 pay periods. He's been working, he's been earning his money, but his employer missed a pay period. And said like, oh, yeah, there's a glitch, we're taking care of it. And then he was able to wait. The second pay period comes, and it's kind of turning into, the check's in the mail. We're taking care of it. And so yesterday we had a talk, and I'm going to see what I can do about getting him his money just as a free service, because certainly I don't want to end up taking all of his money as a lawyer to try to get him his 3 paychecks. I was talking with a woman who had to call 911 to get police to come help de-escalate a situation when her male landlord was threatening her. She literally climbed out the window of the room she was renting to get out of the house because he's at the bedroom door, pounding on the door, yelling and screaming. And she called the police. She crawled out the window. And then she's on the phone with me. I talked with a mother whose daughter is pregnant with the baby of a man who's now in jail. Earlier this week I was on, and that's just yesterday. Earlier this week, I'm on the phone with a woman whose husband is going through cancer treatment. Talked with a woman who just got out of a toxic relationship, and another whose man thought that she should put up with abusive treatment because his behavior was related to his mental illness. Now, and sometimes they're calling me for advice, and I tend to share principles. I tend to not share advice. When it comes to legal things, often I'll share advice. Where I can tell some of those people that they want me to make the decision for them. And usually I try to give them a menu of options. Every once in a while, when it comes down to basically you're going to hurt someone or not hurt someone, I'm pretty clear, well, just don't hurt someone. You do the loving thing, the unloving thing, I'm pretty clear on do the loving thing. But in some of these situations, like I know I don't know all the variables, and it's going to be their decision, and so I leave it to them. I just share a few thoughts and ideas with them and let them know, it's up to you. You're the only one that really knows what's going on there. Talked with another person who's struggling with a mystery illness. It keeps not being what they think it is. She completes the entire course of what should take care of the problem, but it doesn't work, which is one of those things like, oh, well, it must not be that problem. You need to come in for more tests. And also related to this, someone else who was prescribed medication that turned out was causing problems that was worse than what they were trying to fix. Talked with someone whose family just broke an agreement that has a 6-figure negative impact on his family. Family is doing this to him. There just seems to be a lot of things going on in a lot of lives all over the place. So with this I have a field of battle metaphor. And this is how I'm feeling. And it was This part of the discussion, it specifically prompted the other person to say, can you please speak on that tomorrow? Because I think she wants the video. She wants to hear this again and again. Maybe it's daytime, maybe it's night. The clouds are thick overhead, and the field is lit only by scattered lightning and the fires that somehow survive that light, sticky rain. I'm not alone on the field of battle. But those of us staggering once more to our feet seem scattered too far apart to be much help to one another. My armor, as well as theirs, is battered and bloody. I gasp for air, trying to catch my breath while I kneel, using my shield to hold myself up. To hold myself up amongst the corpses of the goblins, the orcs, the zombies, and other monsters scattered on the field that it seems like we've been fighting for endless days. I feel I can hardly stand. I see more creatures pouring over that dark hillside. The fight isn't over. So as a tidal wave of more monsters crashes into the battlefield, I make my way to my feet. I have no idea where my helmet's gone. I look around, I don't see it. So I heft my shield. I unsheath my sword again. And I brace for yet another battle. I feel like it's a losing fight. But I know that if I can just keep going until the sun rises, I'll be okay. As a chattering wave of new shadowy things comes in range, I brace myself and embrace the battle. And that's a lot of what it feels like. And she said that that's a lot of how it feels like to her, too. And for a lot of people, that's what it feels like for a lot of us. We know other people are fighting too, but sometimes it feels like we're too far away to be much help to one another. We could be an encouragement, but it's hard to have someone's back when they're so far away and we're trying so hard to survive our own battle. It's certainly challenging sometimes when part of your role in people's lives means that you're there for them. You've got their back. But that it's not always a reciprocal relationship. Sometimes there's really just nothing they can do. Sometimes there's everything they can do. I mean, I'm in a place in the battle where I'm basically fighting alone. But when the crash happened, I was hit by it because it's my place it got crashed into. And I had things that were mine to do that had to be done by the business owner, but could be done online, could be done by phone, and I was doing that part. But when it came to the practical thing, so many people had my back. People showed up. People made calls to get people to show up. People came down and they looked and they evaluated and they helped. And they descended on the place. And huge chunks of that battle was done completely in my absence. So we're certainly not alone. And when I'm coaching, when I'm counseling, when I'm doing the funeral, I'm there for other people. I've got their back. I'm here to help. I'm here to be a comfort. I'm here to stop the emotional hemorrhaging to whatever level I can. I'm here to be a support. I'm here to help fill you to whatever extent I can. Other people showing up in my life, That they might not be able to do a lot for me to help me get back to full, but they can help me get from 0 to 5%, 0 to 10%. Even just the pleasure of the company of certain people in my life that mean something to me, whose company means something to me. I have a lunch date tomorrow, and I'm going to get to spend some time with one of the beauties in my life that adds a lot to my life, and whose presence and time with her helps fill me a little bit. I've got other events coming up, adventures I get to have, that helps. But a lot of it comes down to the people. And in my particular case, the people that fill me most is the presence of my lady friends. Because I don't have a romance, but I do have friends. And just time with them is helpful to me. Will I get through this? Of course I will. To me, that's a foregone conclusion. Something to remember is that language both expresses and guides our thinking. The words we use, the stories we tell ourselves, it expresses our thoughts and our feelings. It expresses what's going on in our mind. It expresses what's going on in our soul, in our heart, in our spirit. It also guides it. And one of the most powerful ways to learn to control your thinking is to learn to control your language. We have to be aware of the power of our metaphors, the power of our definitions. I just expressed my feelings with the running on empty metaphor. It's a metaphor that creates a scenario that reflects my real feelings. So I express how I'm feeling. I express what I'm going through, and defines the situation in a way I already know I can get through because I have. I know what it's like to run life between empty and a quarter tank for days, weeks, even months at a time. Been there, done that. I'm still here. I got through it. And it expresses how I'm feeling in a way that tells me I can win. With just a little bit of a tweak, I could express the way I'm feeling, defined in a way that makes me powerless. In the battle metaphor, expressing how I'm feeling, being battle weary because I just don't have time to really catch my breath. I don't have time to retreat to the castle to get fully healed so I can enter the battle fresh. It expresses the feeling of just having to stay in the fight because there's just constantly stuff going on. But it also expresses it in a way of victory. That I know all I have to do is keep fighting. And that it might seem dark, but I know I can win. All I have to do is hang on. I don't even have to defeat every foe on the field. I just have to last. And once that sun rises, we'll be fine. We just have to get there. So the metaphor expresses, and the metaphor guides. Crafting the metaphor to get me to get up and keep going. Now, just a simple shift in vocabulary. Like, it's too much. That creates a problem. Because that vocabulary should say, it's too much, means the solution, therefore, is it has to stop being so much. Even when I say it's a pylon, it won't stop. I was like, I need it to stop. Then the flip part of that is now I need to define my side. I really do need the pylon to stop because I need to catch my breath. And so I have to think about that metaphor. Is that how I want to live that? Because what if it doesn't stop? But so long as I keep seeing it as small, shadowy, chittering things coming over that hill, I would probably be okay. If I see it as big giants, huge dragons coming to destroy me, instead of these little annoyances coming to wear me out, then I create a metaphor that could doom me. Instead of having a metaphor that says, okay, here comes more stuff, back into the fight. And these metaphors we create, these images we create by the language that we use, by the pictures we create in our head, are huge. And sometimes we create them completely by accident. A story I use a lot is an executive that said, I want to stop yelling at my family every time I go home. Well, that sounds easy. Okay, well then go home and don't yell at your family. But the only picture that creates, if I say don't yell, what does don't yell look like? Well, it either looks like a specific thing, which is one version of not yelling, or what you see in your head is yelling and say, yeah, don't do that. It's almost like you see yelling with a big circle and a slash through it. Because could you go home and throw things at everybody, but you do it in silence? Is that not yelling? Well, that's a version of not yelling. Is that what he wants to do? Obviously not. So create the picture in your head of what you want. And the picture I create in my head of what I want is that even if I'm running between empty and a quarter tank, I keep going. Even if all I've got is $2 to put in my tank that'll barely get me where I need to go, that's okay. I still get where I need to go. Even if in my metaphor, if the battle has to continue, I get up and I continue. And it's creating the metaphor, it's creating the image, it's creating the feeling, it's creating the thought pattern that allows me to keep on going. Now, sometimes people do the positive thinking thing all the way to the other side of, no, I can handle this is easy, and you're getting knocked down to empty, but you just keep saying it, like, no, my tank is full, my tank is full, my tank is full. And that can be helpful to keep yourself going, but it can also completely run you down and bring you down to zero. But you believe that you're fine until you finally snap. And, you know, the most dramatic case I had intersect my life was a woman who had cancer. She was dying. She was literally dying. And the doctors did the tests. Objectively, they could tell her this is what's going on. But she was praying, she was believing, she had her theology, and she was making her decisions on that. And I had asked her, how are you doing? How is the treatment going? How is the cancer? And she says, I choose to believe Jesus rather than believe the doctors. She had her theology. And she was ignoring reality because her theology informed her that what the tests found at the doctor's office she could ignore until it was too late to do anything. And so we see this, and sometimes very concretely, and that one probably the most dramatic demonstration of reality and theology slamming into each other. And when reality crashes into theology, theology loses because it was incorrect. It informed her decision making, but it was incorrect. So I try to be careful about ascribing things to God, because if I'm wrong and someone believes me, they think it's God that was wrong. But as you create these scenarios, you create these metaphors, you create these emotional word pictures, you want to be aware of how you're defining things. You want to be aware of, am I expressing my feelings in a way that I'm trapping myself? Am I expressing my feelings in a way that I am throwing away what power I have? And we consider, how do we define things? Are we defining things in helpful ways? Are we defining things in ways that are adequately realistic, meaning that we're not so ignoring truth that we're plowing forward on stuff, and certainly with a number of us that are martial artists going, I'm tough, I can handle it. So, well, I don't know, maybe that consistent knee problem needs to be looked at before you really break something. No, I can do it, well, I don't know, I can't see that bone sticking out there. That might be something worth, maybe calling the match, throwing the towel. No, I can do it. I mean, when I watch a movie sometimes, and it's the gymnast jumps on, I have to complete the competition, and I'm looking at it as a martial arts master and thinking, in real life, they would be risking being permanently crippled, destroying that knee and the hip and hurting themselves forever to finish one round and one competition. Is that really going to be worth it? Now, that's a judgment call, not one I would make. Because if I'm dealing with some 20-year-old girl who I'm thinking has easily 50, 70 years of life ahead of her, how much of that do I want her to spend having blown out a knee doing one performance on the floor for one competition? And my answer to that is none of it. But you see that in movies, it's very inspiring, and of course she's never crippled for the rest of her life, so it always ends up working out. But it is something to consider in real life. So how do we define things? What questions do we ask ourselves? Will I get through it? That's typical. Our society teaches that kind of question. We wonder, will I get through it? Won't I get through it? And what we're wondering is this the last disaster? Is this the disaster that's going to end it all? I just assume I'll get through it. So far, my track record is pretty good. 100%. Whatever's happened in my life, every single thing that's happened in my life, I have somehow gotten through it in some way, shape, or form. Maybe not the way I wish I got through it. Maybe not with the outcome I would wish for. Maybe not the outcome I was aiming at, but something. I ended up with pieces left over at the end that allowed me to put together something so that I'm here. I think that's a pretty good indicator. I'll probably get through this somehow. So the real question is, how will I get through this? How? Not if. I know I will. It's how. I just need to know how. What will it take? What will I have to do? The principle of radical responsibility recognizes that we are success machines. Whatever I am doing successfully. Is that the choice I want to be making? Now, sometimes you get people that they're being very successful and doing some very, very good things, but maybe it's not as wise as they might think. When I'm dealing with the wife and the mother who is running herself down to empty, she has built into her system nowhere where she gets filled. And you can kind of see her beginning to slowly crack because she can't maintain this pace indefinitely, but that's the plan, is just keep going until she can't. So she's making decisions. And it looks good right now, but what happens when she just can't keep it up anymore? And that's a good question. So you have to look at it. Radical responsibility recognizes we are success machines. She is succeeding at everything she's doing, but part of what she's doing without thinking how this is impacting her, she's running herself down to empty. She's getting increasingly unhealthy. And at some point when her health fails, when her energy fails, when her body just says, no more, then what's the plan? And a part of it for her is because she feels guilty if she backs off at all. So her guilt drives her to push really too hard. But then here's part of the strategy, and she's noticed this pattern, is when she finally collapses, when she gets so sick she's stuck in bed, when there's no one taking care of the family, because she's sick in bed, she just can't. She doesn't feel guilty. So the actual strategy that she finally realized she was using is, I push, collapse. When I'm in my collapse state, I don't feel guilty for not push. But if I'm not collapsed, I feel guilty if I'm not constantly pushing. And so the strategy is push until I collapse. I catch my breath when I'm sick. And then I push until I collapse, catch my breath because I'm sick. Push until... And this pattern that she's had going on ever since she's been a kid. That she only gives herself permission to slow down. I'm a way type A personality, super achieving personality. That the only time she gives herself permission to slow down is when she's sick. So what does her body learn? She learns, I keep racing hard until I collapse. It's the marathon equivalent of I run my marathon as hard as I can until I collapse from heat stroke. And then so long as I'm in the hospital tent and someone's having to put me to an IV and stuff, it's okay for me to not run. But as soon as I'm out of this tent, I got to get out there and I have to run. And the only time I get my break is if I collapse myself, so I have to push myself even harder. Because if I'm tired, I have to push so hard I collapse. And that's her strategy. Is that the one you really want to use? We were doing a balance exercise. One kid lost their balance, knocked over another kid. The kid that got knocked over stayed on the ground. When I indicated he should get up fast, he pointed to the other kid and said, "She knocked me over." I knew that. I saw that. For about 1 second, him being on the ground was because of the girl next to him. She had knocked him over. By second 2, the reason he was still on the ground was all him. He was more committed to affixing blame than he was to fixing the problem. He successfully gave away his power by blaming her. By blaming her for him still being on the ground. Now, was it her fault he got knocked down? Sure, I'll grant that. But he wasn't hurt. He could get up. It would take him a single second to get up. He invested 10 seconds giving away his power by blaming her and not fixing the problem, rather than spend 1 second fixing it. 1 second of being on the ground was her. The rest was him. He stayed on the ground. And when we can recognize where we have this kind of power, all of a sudden we have a lot more control in our lives. Now, what if, on the other hand, he fell down, and when he fell down, he broke his leg? Should he stay down or should he get up? Well, then he should stay down. And then if he has that idea, so no, leg's not broken. I can get up. It's hopping on 1 foot with the bone protruding. Okay, that would also be an unwise decision. No, I have the personal power. I can do it. Mind over matter. If I don't mind, it doesn't matter. I can do it. That wouldn't be very smart. You got to know when you can't get up and you shouldn't get up, and then don't get up. Sometimes you just got to stay still. Wait for help. Call for help. Admit you're broken. Admit when you're running on empty. And don't keep pretending you're endlessly strong. Sometimes it's okay to be weak. Sometimes I've had people who really aren't that close to me and the situation. Oh my gosh, I'm so impressed with how well you're handling this and how strong you are that you keep going. And then I said, well, I appreciate the compliment, but there's really not that much to be impressed about because I really have been running on empty. But I'm not as strong as it might look because you see me still going. And when the car is going, you don't know if the tank is almost empty or the tank is full. You just see the car going, and that's all they see. They see Scott going. But I'm going on an empty tank. I'm going battle weary. I'm hanging on, I'm pushing through, I'm going to get where I need to go. But boy, is it exhausting. It's okay to not always be strong. It's okay to say you need help. I wasn't in town. If I didn't have help getting this taken care of, and the fastest I could have gotten here would have been maybe 6 hours. If no one was here having my back, taking care of it for me, who knows what things might have been. It could have been just wide open all night long. If I didn't even have someone to make calls and even get here to take a look at it. It might not even have been until sometime in the late morning before I even knew, until someone came by and go, oh wait, what's going on over at the dojo? I wonder if Soke knows about this. Does anyone have his number? Imagine even the possibility I could have come home late Tuesday night, Wednesday in the wee hours, or gotten here on Wednesday in the afternoon and walked up and seen it for the first time with it having been wide open for most of a week. That could have happened too. Other people had my back. I had to be willing to let it go because I had no control over it. And say, oh, you're so wise. Well, I mean, not really. There wasn't anything I could do about it. Oh, you've got great people. Well, that part was definitely true. People just descended on the dojo to help. Definitely, absolutely amazing people, which I had so much appreciation. It was tear-jerking to behold. So now with all of the stuff we already had going on, how many people were willing to show up and help, and just the magnitude of that gratitude for the people who were doing that. And as we just kept hitting the ground running, and we just kept on going and getting on top of things as much as we could. In 27 years, we have never missed a class. That we've had scheduled classes off. We've had classes off because nobody showed up for class. But we've never had people show up for a scheduled class and there's just no class. The dojo got wiped out. We didn't miss a class. That was on the news too. So Gabby, one of my black belts, was actually interviewed, and one of the things she said in the interview is, in 27 years we haven't missed a class, we won't miss a class. And then the following Monday, Master Donald, who was teaching classes on Monday, he made sure that happened. The gap between stimulus and response. There is a gap. If you're an animal, if you're a plant, if you're an inanimate object, stimulus, response, action, reaction. It's physics. But with conscious beings, there's a gap. Stuff happens. I didn't decide someone would crash into my dojo. I didn't sit there and say, hey, I have an idea. A lot of this stuff comes at us that we don't control. I do decide what I choose from my options. Wasn't one of my options to decide how these two people were going to behave in the car. It wasn't my decision to determine whether or not they were going to be fighting. It wasn't my decision to determine whether or not she was going to grab the wheel. It wasn't my decision to determine whether they were going to crash into the corner, careen off the tree, come through the bushes, hit the fire hydrant, spin out, and completely wipe out my storefront, parent lounge, kid lounge, and pro shop and a wall. I didn't pick that. That wasn't my decision. That was the consequence of their choices. And then physics. Once that happens, then all of us connected to it start to have choices to make. We have a menu of options. The simple part of the menu of options is, once I know, what do I do? Do I spread the information? Well, that's one of the first things that happened. One of the neighbors across the street called someone who trains here, who had my number, who called me. Then I called someone. So information started moving fast. As people received information, they descended on the dojo. We had 24-hour security starting from within minutes of the accident, less than an hour after the accident. Somebody was here. until the place was completely secure. I didn't decide that. People were volunteering for that. People were showing up for that. People who hadn't trained for years. Some people who had never trained showed up because they still consider this dojo part of their ohana, part of their home, a place that is an oasis for them. So a lot of stuff comes at us that we don't control, but a lot of stuff creates choices, creates a menu of options, creates decisions that we need to make. Now, in the mix, there's all kinds of choices. One of the things we can do is we can choose to complain. Now, someone says, wow, no complaining. Well, you want to watch out making complaining a habit, but you know, sometimes complaining about something at least once can be helpful. And it was emotionally helpful to me. It's part of the grieving process. When you're going through grief, there might be the denial, there might be the bargaining, but there'll be some anger. There could be some depression involved. And all that's okay. You don't want to get stuck in it. You want to be working your way through it. So I might decide to complain. I might decide complaining will be helpful to me. And I personally watch out for looping. What I mean by looping is if I'm saying the same things again and again and again and again, and there doesn't seem to be any forward motion, then that means I'm kind of digging a pit for myself. If I go through a couple of times and by the third time I'm noticing a shift in vocabulary, a shift in perspective, okay, that means I'm probably working through it. I'm not making my situation worse. I'm not doing what's called reifying. And reifying is when you're making a reality out of something that's not actually real. And so when you're processing something, as you begin to circle around through it again, you should notice a shift. And that tells you that you're probably processing. Now the shift might not even always seem good. Because if you're in denial, that's part of your emotion saying, intellectually I might know what the truth is, but emotionally I'm not prepared to deal with it. And then as you're processing your way through, you might start to say, but I feel worse. Well, it's because you got out of denial. You maybe worked through some bargaining, and now you're into the angry part, or the depressed part, and so you feel worse. But that also might be part of the processing, and that's okay. So you can choose to walk through the process. You can choose to grieve. But sometimes people choose to not grieve. Sometimes people choose to avoid the process. Sometimes people choose to deny it. Just like sometimes people choose to get themselves stuck. They may not know that's what they're choosing, but that's what they're choosing, is to get themselves stuck. Because that's a natural consequence of the choices they're making. Just like the accident is a natural consequence of someone grabbing a wheel and yanking a wheel when someone's driving down a road. That they're not deciding, hey, I have an idea. Let's cause a crash. How can I cause a crash? Instead, what happened is that they emotionally reacted, and in that emotional reaction, they made a choice to grab the wheel and yank it for whatever reasons was going on in their head at the moment. And the normal and natural consequence of that kind of behavior was the crash. Fortunately, nobody got hurt, but that was a matter of luck on their part because there was nothing going on at the dojo at the time. So maybe I'll choose to complain. Maybe I'll choose to allow myself to be angry. Maybe I'll choose to allow myself to be sad. Maybe I'll choose to not do any of it. Maybe I'll choose to plunge into my grief and stay there until I'm ready to come out. Maybe I'll choose to set aside my grief and focus on a baby coming because I have a baby shower to attend less than a day after I find out about the death. Maybe I might be going through a divorce, and I'll decide to feel terrible about the divorce. Or maybe I'll decide to not be grieving the divorce right now and set that aside and focus on the joy of somebody else's wedding that I'm a part of. It's my choice. I get to decide. Maybe I'll choose to file an insurance claim. Maybe I'll choose to file a lawsuit. Maybe I'll choose to give someone else lead on it. Maybe I'll choose to handle it myself. Maybe I'll pick something straightforward and obvious. Maybe I'll decide to get creative. So many options. There is a gap between stimulus and response that conscious beings have. There is a gap between stimulus and response that you could almost say is a key definition of being sentient. Is that we're not just the responder to the stimulus, we are the observer of the stimulus and the response, and we can decide to shift in that gap. We can decide to make a complete U-turn in that gap. We can pick our direction. We're not just stimulus-response creatures. We're deciders. We're choosers. We decide our focus. We decide our direction. We decide how much of this we accept and how much of this we reject, how much of this we do now, how much of this we do later, if we're going to address it. If I'm lying on the ground and my leg's broken, it might be a good idea to not try to get up right away. Also might be a good idea to recognize I might benefit from some help for a broken leg. Say, no, I'll be fine. I'm tough. I'll just lie here until it heals. Might not be a good strategy. Might have to employ some tools, like a splint short-term, a cast long-term. Make sure it gets set properly. Get it x-rayed. Make sure that everything's where it's supposed to be, so when it heals back right instead of heals back wrong. All kinds of decisions to make that have consequences. They might go check out my leg, and in the process of checking out my leg, find out that there's something else in there that's also not supposed to be there. Now, that tumor is not supposed to be there, or that looks like that might be ripped in there. That doesn't look like it's related to this accident, but something else might get found. It was already there. If I didn't have that one problem they were looking at, they might never have found the other one. Didn't cause it. And you're like, boy, it's a good thing I was having an x-ray. And if I hadn't broken the leg, wouldn't have had the x-ray. Hadn't had the x-ray, wouldn't have spotted the tumor. Hadn't spotted the tumor, that thing could have killed me. So many options. I can use the gap to make a choice. The bigger I can make that gap, the more power I have. So I leverage my will into that gap. Will you always be successful? Of course not. Nobody is always successful at anything. It's all probability. It's all odds. It's all getting better at things. But in that context, I am a success machine. I am a success machine. Oh, the way I'm doing it with the kids. I am a success machine. We get into it. We have a good time. I was just finishing a book called The Compassionate Samurai. It's talking about commitment. You need to be committed. You need to be dedicated to what you're doing. And one of the things then he notes in the chapters is everyone is committed. Everyone is committed to something. I can look at my life and what I invest myself in to see what I'm committed to. So what if I look at my life and I realize that, I haven't read a book for a year, but I have completely defeated 3 complete computer or video games. What does that tell you? It tells you I'm not committed to reading, but I am committed to my games. Suppose I look at my life and I realize that I've spent an average of 2 or 3 hours a night or 4 hours a night or whatever on Facebook, but that I haven't gotten any writing done. What does that tell you? I'm not committed to writing. I am really committed to Facebook. What if I look at my training and I realize that I haven't been practicing. I've only been doing what I need to do in class. I haven't been practicing my material. I haven't done every single thing every single month for years. Then what does that tell you? I'm not committed to my training, but I am committed to all these other things I do. Hopefully, I find when I observe my own life that I'm committed to things that I choose. That it's things I choose because I'm making good decisions. I'm looking at it and I'm deciding. Whatever I'm doing it successfully. I mean, if I commit to being on Facebook and streaming my Netflix series, yeah, I can get that done. Iron Fist came out. Within 72 hours of that posting up on Netflix, I had watched the entire series. I was committed. I was absolutely devoted to making sure I watched that show. Other things, not so much. I didn't exactly finish reading a book in the same period. It took me, now, the number of hours it took, I probably could have finished an entire book. But I was committed to seeing that program. Much more than I was committed to finishing a book, at least that week. I'm trying to get to 52 books this year. I'm behind. It's August. It's early August when I'm recording this. Right now, I should have just finished book number 31. I'm finishing book number, I think I'm at 28, so I'm behind. What's that tell you? Well, for one thing, it tells you I'm not committed to keeping up. But it tells you I have been committed to books well enough that 32-ish weeks into the year, I've gotten through 28-ish books. So it tells you, okay, so that's a pretty decent level of commitment. It's not a total commitment. On the other hand, Iron Fist did not get 72 hours past being posted before I had watched the entire series. Defenders is going to be posted pretty soon, and you can bet that that's probably not going to be 2 weeks without me getting that whole series. I might not get that one done in 3 days. Iron Fist, I was really interested in getting too fast. I want to see how they did Iron Fist. But you can bet by the 2-week mark when that gets posted, I will have watched that entire series. You can tell by the television programs I keep up on. I've been committed to those programs. But you can also tell by the television programs I've never seen I'm not committed to those programs. So we all have our commitments. A lot of our commitments are emotion-driven, that we're committed to doing what we want. Sometimes we're committed to absolving ourselves of responsibility. Sometimes we're committed to blaming. Sometimes we're committed to, whatever. I gained 22 pounds in 32 days. Do you know how committed you have to be to eating to do that? I was committed for 32 days. Oh boy, you can watch I was committed to my calorie consumption. Now, if you consider, if my body is storing 22 pounds of fat, and thankfully it wasn't 22 pounds of stored fat, because the first 4 pounds of that dropped literally overnight. So that tells you, okay, a bunch of it was just stored in my body. So when I just did a short fast and I was able to clear my intestines, 4 pounds dropping in less than 16 hours tells you, okay, well, that at least wasn't fat. So let's just assume we got 20 pounds of fat. 20 pounds of fat is something like 60 to 75,000 extra calories. Let's just say it's roughly 60. And so that I'm consuming a couple of thousand calories a day in excess of what I'm burning. That takes commitment. Not a commitment I realized I was making, mind you, but one I did make. What drove that? Well, I was feeling emotionally empty. And I'm going, feel empty? What do you do when you feel empty? You want to feel full. Well, if you want to feel full, what's that mean? Oh, that means food until I'm full. But when you're feeding food to a belly, that's not filling an empty heart. And so I could eat as much food as I wanted. My belly's going, full, must stop now. My heart's still going, empty, still empty. Need to feel full. And as soon as there's more room in my belly, more food goes down, and the heart still isn't filled, because that's not what fills a heart. For 32 days I did that. The other part of that is my cortisol levels. That the stress hormone cortisol, short term, it helps ramp up your performance level. Long term, it does some serious damage to your body. One of the things it does kind of in the medium term, as well as the long term, is it programs your body to store everything it can. Because cortisol level diminishes your body's digestive function. And so then it goes and stores what it can, so that it'll have it for later. So we could probably figure that maybe half of the extra 22 pounds I gained in 32 days, we'll say 11 of the pounds was probably just you ate too much, and no matter what else was going on in your life, if you ate that much, you're just going to pack it in. But the other half, chances are really, really high. That's because of the cortisol levels. The stress I was under, the stress I allowed myself to be under, the stress I chose for myself and I hung on to because I was processing it. The grief I was going through because I decided I was going to walk that through. I decided I'm going to step past denial as fast as I can. I'm going to step past bargaining as fast as I can. I'm going right into anger. I'm going right into depression, and I'm doing it on purpose because I want to process this pain. I want to process this fury. I want to process this resentment. I want to get through to the other side. I don't want this stress pending. I want to get done with it. And I decided to walk it through. Now, I didn't just know there's going to be such a pile-on. But I'm trying to process that as I go, and I'm trying to keep doing the $2, $3, $5 at a time in the tank so I just keep it going. Because I decided. Now I know a whole bunch of techniques to process stress. I didn't need to leave my cortisol levels as high as they were. I didn't need to. I decided to by the chain of choices I was making. And I didn't decide on 22 pounds, but the 22 pounds was a normal and natural consequence of a combination of what I was eating and how much of it I was eating, combined with not adjusting my exercise. So I'm still doing my normal exercise I would do when I have my normal diet, which should set me between 200 and 210 pounds. And my stress levels were way up, and I let them be. I decided. And because I decided, that means I can decide different. Because I am a success machine. What I did very successfully. It wasn't something that was producing the outcome where I was choosing the outcome, but it certainly was doing something that was producing an outcome that is a normal and natural consequence of the choices I was making. And I accept that. And it's because I accept that, it wasn't done to me. Nobody decided to take a bite of any of that food into my body but me. Nobody decided that there wasn't going to be an adjustment in physical exercise levels to kind of counterbalance at least some of that. Had I ramped up the exercise to compensate for the food levels, there's a pretty good chance, that it wouldn't have been 22 pounds. It might have been 18 pounds. Who knows? Depends what kind of exercise I was doing and how much of it I was doing. I was the one who decided, though, that I wasn't going to ramp up the calorie burning. I was the one who decided that. That means that if I decide now, okay, in 55 days, from August 1st to my birthday in September, I'm going to lose all those extra pounds. Because I decided one way, I can also decide another way. Because I decided to not watch what I was eating and to just consume, I can decide to be more careful about what I'm eating. And because I know my emotional patterns, and if I just say, no, okay, fine. I know that about me. That I build in 6 days on, 1 day off. 1 day a week. one day out of 7, I can just take the day off of the diet. I can do whatever I want. And also because I know I have a personality tendency of the use it or lose it. Like, well, you know, if I only have my one day off and if I don't use my one day, I'm going to lose my day. Guess what my impulse is? Gotta use the day. But instead, I give myself permission to bank my day. So when I got through my first week, I thought, you know, I really don't need a eat anything I want day this week. I'm going to bank this one, save it for later. And for me, yesterday was the day. I used it yesterday. Now, here's the cool thing. I still have one extra day banked. So if sometime I need 2 back-to-back days, I can do that too. But the fact I could bank it stopped me from having the, oh, I use it or lose it impulse that I get. And I know I get that. So I create my plan, taking into account who I know I am. And then yesterday, I had cake because one of our kids had a birthday and the family left me cake and someone else left their cake. And so there was a whole bunch of cake. And I thought, you know, I'm going to have cake. And I'm going to catch up on some movies and I'm going to have popcorn. And I said, so I'm packing it all in on my Saturday because that's going to be my day. And I'm going to use my day this week. And I still have one bank day that's kind of floating forward. And I can do this because I am a success machine. I make the decisions. I make the choices. It's my power. If I don't like the things I find myself committed to, I can change it and be committed to different things. Then I can go to work to make it different. I can decide to be committed to an outcome instead of a process. And like decide to be committed to being 210 pounds instead of being committed to eating all the food I was eating. I have tools for that. If I have tools for that, and I do, I can get started. Maybe it'll take a while. Maybe it'll be hard. I get to decide if it's worth it. And maybe it will be worth it to me. Maybe it won't be worth it to me. But I get to decide if it's worth it. And it's my choice. And I'm the decider. I have the power. And a lot of this is a personality thing for me because I have a powerful temperament. What that means is I don't like blaming because blaming is powerlessness. If I blame something, I'm throwing power away and my temperament gets a little twitchy with no power. That is, if I'm facing a situation that says, well, Scott, you just have to understand there is absolutely nothing you can do. You are powerless. You are helpless. You are like a little baby letting stuff be done for you. There's nothing you can... That kind of stuff drives me nuts. Seems to be a family trait, too, because it drives my mother nuts, too. Well, it's got to be something I can... Nope, nothing you can do. It just drives me nuts. But that's what blame does. It gives away power. And I'm always looking for, where's my power? I want my power. Yeah, okay, you might have knocked me down. That's second number 1. I decide if I get up. You don't decide if I stay down. I decide if I stay down because I want that power. I like having the power. I want to be able to make my own decisions. I want to be able to control my outcomes. I want to be able to have a choice. And the more you use blame and the more you make excuses, the more power you're giving away. And here's part of the thing for me. There is enough life where you don't have power. I'm not giving away the power I have. There's enough things already I can't control. I don't want to throw away where I have control. I want to be able to do what I'm able to do instead of declare my own powerlessness where I do have power. Because I don't like all those places I don't have power. I don't like all those places I don't have choices. And one way you can look at it that might help some people is like throwing away the money in your bank. Like, no. Being broke is my excuse. Take all the money away. Take it away. I'm throwing all my money away so I can say that I'm broke. Well, I don't want to do that. So I hang on to my power. Because I know I have it. And I want to keep what I have. Because there's enough places where I don't have it. And that I just have to accept. So that's kind of where I am. That's what I'm going through. And I hope all of this helps you too. Thank you.